Good morning, good night, good everything in between. Welcome back to the Literary Ramblings podcast. I am one of your hosts, Corrie, and I am with my lovely co-host,
Charlotte.
And we talk about books and stuff on here. It's been a minute since we've had a podcast. I think something like almost a year.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's accurate? Yeah.
I feel like that is accurate.
We finished up one at the end of 22.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost that recording. So we did not do the final podcast of 2022. Yeah, and then for this podcast, we decided last year that what we were going to do, because one of our favorite series is the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. And we had previously read the first trilogy, which is Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. And then there's two more books after that have been out for a while. But Pierce Brown finally announced the last book in the series was going to come out in 2023 in July. So we were like, for the podcast, let's reread the first trilogy, do a podcast on it, and then we'll do the next three books.
Next two. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we would be ready, the next two, and then we would be ready for the third one when it came out. And so both of us pre-ordered the book, and we kind of like started rereading. We have not been great about doing podcasts this year. A lot of that was my fault. The beginning of the year was just kind of rough, I think, for me in terms of reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember like exactly why, whether that was more work related or just in general, I was kind of in a reading slump. And so I was very much slogging through the first two books in the trilogy.
Because I actually made Red Rising a pick for another book club that I'm in, and that really helped. So I finished that book within a month because I had a separate deadline.
Yes.
But yes.
Yeah, and I was like really, really slow about it. I was just not getting into it. I don't know. Whatever. Reading slumps happen. It just kind of was a little sucky. So, but then at the beginning of 2023, it was April. I met a guy, and by the end of the year, we were married. And so my year has kind of been crazy because I went from single, without thinking that God really had anyone for me. And now I'm married and living in a completely different city. And like we planned a wedding in like 4 months, and it was a lot. And then immediately went into the holidays. So we are finally back on track.
That sums it up. My life has not changed nearly as much. So I've just, been...
Charlotte has been amazing. She's been so patient with me and understanding, and she's been with me this whole time, and it's been wonderful. I love her to death because she's just so patient and understanding and just giving me so much grace in the last year for like the book club and stuff. I think it was like midsummer or like end of summer where we kind of were like, we're probably not going to read for the rest of the year. Or at least we were like, I don't think we're going to get a podcast out.
Once it was pretty confirmed that you were going to have a wedding, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
We're going to finish these.
Yeah. So, it's been great. I'm very, very happy. And, but I did finally finish the books. I finished Golden Sun because I listened to it. I ended up moving just over an hour away from where I was. So I was actually going back and forth on the weekends a ton. So I listened to it in the car. And that really helped me get through that book. And then I ended up doing the same with Morning Star. So Charlotte finished Red Rising super early on. And then I kind of like got through it. And then I finished the end of the series.
Yeah, you finished it. You finished Morning Star before me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually, technically, no. I was on like the last disc and I had to return it to the library. But like, I didn't even have like a whole hour left of the book.
So close.
Yeah. So we did finish much closer than we started.
In both of our defenses, these are not short books.
No.
This is like, what, like 1,200 pages, I mean?
Yeah. Total between all three books. Yeah, it's not a short series. Like, the first book is just like a normal length.
Mm-hmm.
It's over 300, but it's under 400.
Yeah.
So it's not like that bad. But then each book gets like a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not like The Wheel of Time, which I read way back in high school, where like every book is super long and dense. So
yeah. Yes. But please bear with us, as it has been quite a while since both of us finished Red Rising and Golden Sun, which are the first two books of the series. And so I think that we may end up focusing a lot on Morning Star, which is the last book. And that's just the way it's going to be. Also, this is going to be full of spoilers. We're not going to hold it back anything. But I guess we could give a quick like recommendation or not. I did not think about star ratings for these books personally before we started recording this, so I don't know what I'll give them this time around.
I feel like we could just say which our favorites are, if you have one.
I don't know which one's my favorite, actually.
I think it might actually be the second one for me.
I was about to say that for like literally no reason, because I don't fully remember. Once I read a series, it's very difficult for me to separate events from book to book.
It is. I agree. Although in this case, because the first book takes place so firmly like in the Institute for most of it.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, there is a nice cutoff there of like,
at least for the first one.
Yeah. So the second one is a little bit more Darrow being the main character, being out in the worlds plural, and I liked that.
Yeah.
That aspect of it, because I like the first book a lot. Obviously, we wouldn't have kept reading them.
Yeah.
But I feel like I got even more excited when he proved that he could do a bigger like universe well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like, I mean, like I said, instinctively, I thought the second book would be my favorite. But that does sum it up. Like, I did really like that. So I would agree. I think the second book is really good.
And it was fun reading it with my other book club and like hearing their opinions on it. Like one of the women in my club didn't finish it, the Red Rising. Because she was like, this is so intense.
It is.
And it is. Yeah, rereading it was like, oh.
This is an incredibly violent series.
It is.
Like, it is incredibly violent and graphic at times. There's no graphic sex. They talk about graphic sex. They don't go into detail or anything, but there's so much graphic violence, which is something that I remembered before we reread, but it is like, it was interesting to gauge like my reaction to it, since I knew some of it was coming, and I didn't remember all of it, but.
And there's like, he's not afraid to be gross is the thing.
Yeah, for like, sure.
A lot of books I feel like do this really weird like stylized violence where it somehow just doesn't like hit as hard.
It's kind of like in movies, like the difference between like watching an action movie that's made for families versus an action movie that's made for adults, because like there's no blood in the Avengers series. Like, there's a little bit, but there's really, like, it's very minimal. Like, people can be, like, impaled and there's, like, no blood.
Yeah.
But it's, like, so it's like that. It's the difference between that and just having, like, more realistic effects. I would compare it to that.
Yeah.
This is the adult realistic effects version of violence.
Yes. This would be rated R for sure if you made this 100%. Or TV show or whatever. It'd be mature.
For sure.
I guess we should summarize some of the plot.
Well, I don't know. I just kind of want to give a rating. I don't know that I could summarize all of it off the top of my head before we, like, discuss some of it.
Yeah.
Because it's been a minute. I don't know. Reading it the first time, I was like, this is easily 5 stars. And reading it the second time, I was like, I can kind of see some of the criticism. I haven't read a ton of criticism for this series, but I've read, like, a very small bit, and I was like, yeah, some of this is valid as far as the critique that people have given it, which, like, I didn't expect it to be perfect, obviously. it's just a book series. But I did still like it. I don't think that I liked it nearly as much as the first time I read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
the first time I read it, yeah, we read them really fast for one thing.
yes, we did.
And I think that changes your experience because you're not slowing down and like looking at everything.
Yeah. You're also like you don't have any heads up for anything that's going on when you're reading it for the first time. Whereas the second time, there's like certain events that you're like, I'm waiting for this to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It is a crazy book series. And it does, I think that when you read it for the first time, I think most people will read it quickly. It reads fast. I mean, there are parts, obviously, that are going to read a little bit slower. But on the whole, like, I think it is a very pedal to the metal, quick moving book series.
He does really well with action, and I feel like there aren't a ton of just talking scenes, and that's the only like drawback is where it gets a little bit more political in the third book. There's a lot more just like discussing things, and that's not quite as interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But it's important is the thing. Like, there's nothing in there that I was really like, oh, we don't need to know about this, you know?
Yeah, and I think that they set up the politics really well in the first two books. That I think, and they do it slowly. I think that, well, we'll get into that. Remind me about the politics and setup. But I would still recommend this book series to people. I used to recommend it all the time. Only to adults, obviously.
Yeah.
And only to people so mostly people who were interested in sci-fi, but had maybe not read so much, had been maybe more into fantasy before. Because I think that this is actually, if you're a grown-up who has read some good authors and you focus on fantasy, I think that this is a good transition series to being more interested in sci-fi. Because it has a lot of fantasy elements, especially the first book.
Yeah.
And it uses a lot of mythology as well. So I think that it ties. I think that this series, I would never call it a fantasy series, but I think that it ties in fantasy elements really well. And I know that like it definitely, as somebody who grew up reading mostly fantasy, this definitely did help me see how I could be interested in sci-fi.
Yeah.
And it just would kind of depend.
Yeah, a lot of the like beats, like the emotional beats, the plot beats, they felt similar to what you would get in a fantasy book. It's just obviously the setting, the technology, and all of that is different.
Yes, but it is still like so fantasy. Like they use swords. And it's like, it's cool. Like they use a lot of fantasy elements.
It's very Dune-like in a way.
Yeah?
I know. Well, because you haven't read... Did you watch the movie Dune at all, or no?
I did not.
It's not that similar, but it is similar. Like, there's, like, a chosen one plot.
Yeah.
You know, the main character loses someone close to him. He tries to, like, lead a rebellion on a planet. There's a lot of similarities there, and even what made me think of it, though, is your note about swords. It's the same way in Dune. It's like they've developed this technology that's so good that like you can only use a sword to penetrate the shields that they've created.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wouldn't have seen that connection until you said that.
Yeah.
But that's similar too.
It's like the technology's so good, but it's not backwards compatible. And so that's it. Like that's all you can do.
Yep. I mean, even in the third book, like there's those moments where they're using EMPs, so then they're using like regular guns, and it's like
yeah, it's interesting. I feel like this time around I could enjoy more of the elements of the book series than I did the first time. Building. Yeah Agreed. So would you still recommend this series to people?
I would. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious to see when we get to the next two and see what I think of those, because like we're kind of treating this trilogy as one thing, and I think that is the way it feels, and probably the other two books won't change that. So, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure the next book takes place 10 years after. I can't confirm that, but I thought one was a prequel, but I'm not sure on that anymore. I've really avoided learning or reading anything about
I didn't really want any spoilers or anything. So
Yeah.
And the reviews that I've seen of this book, I did see a YouTube short where someone was saying that they were overrated. Which is funny because I really haven't seen that many people talking about it. I'm not on Book Talk or anything like that, so.
No, I'm not on the right side of Book Talk because
yeah.
I am a woman on TikTok, and therefore all I get for Book Talk is like smut.
Yeah.
So
that seems
whatever.
To be, I'm not on TikTok at all, so.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I hadn't heard anyone else talking about this series, and originally how I discovered it. Shout out, I guess. I don't even know his username, but someone on fanfiction.net told me about this series.
Oh, yeah? I didn't know that.
I didn't tell you that?
No.
Yeah.
I thought you just found it, because you're always finding, like, I don't know, I'm going to say unknown books, but, like, it was not a series that I was familiar with either. Like, I'd never heard of the series until you mentioned it. And when did we read it? Like, it was a few years ago.
Yeah, it was a few years ago because that recommendation came to me in, like, college, so.
Yeah, and we finally got around to it.
It might have been, like, 2019.
Wow. And
but
then
anyway,
we waited forever for the last book.
Yes, and the funny thing is that the guy who recommended it to me wrote Hunger Games fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely see why, because I'm like, if you read Red Rising, that book is not that similar to the Hunger Games, but it has kind of similar elements.
Yeah, I would say that, like, it's a good comparison to make.
Mm-hmm. Like a.
Yeah, I wouldn't compare the series to the Hunger Games.
No,
but I would compare.
First.
Yeah, definitely the first book feels very Hunger Games-esque.
Yeah, so I didn't see it as overrated because that was the only way I had heard of it, and still have heard about it. Is like I'm always the one recommending it to people. I guess is my takeaway.
Yeah, I've heard very little about it.
Yeah,
in general.
And it would be a fun one to make into a movie or TV show. Probably better TV show, I would think. But it would be expensive. So.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like it would be kind of difficult to do really well.
Yeah.
So much. And I mean, you run into this with almost any book, but I think that books that specifically follow one main character the entire time are more difficult than books that have multiple perspectives in them.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, that's kind of what's unique about this series is you never leave Darrow.
Nope. Never. Not once. So you're never in anyone else's head. You never get anyone else's, like, not even like a third limited, what is it?
Yeah, isn't that it? Third person. Omniscience?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't even get that. It's 100% in his head all the time, and it's such a large world, and it's such a big space that I kind of wish that we could be another people.
You think so?
But then at the same time, like, it works so well to not be.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and I think that part of it is because we're going to start getting into spoilers probably going forward. So if you want to read the series, which we both highly recommend, pause here and come back when you have read the first 3 books. Might be a minute, but, you know, they're great. You'll probably get through them fast. But I think that part of why we're stuck in Darrow's head the entire time is that Darrow is really very much the only relatable character, like, to us.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And it's a lot because he started from the bottom, and now he's thrust into society, and it's so different, and it's so vast, and it's like, there are characters in this series that even, like, Darrow can't relate to at all.
Yeah.
Because they come from such a different background that it's almost impossible for him to sit down and try to get, like, in their head in a way that would make you feel like you actually understand them.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably a big reason why we stick with Darrow the entire time, is because I don't know, it would be really difficult to be in somebody else's head.
And I also think that it's a smart choice in that when you're doing something like this where he's playing, like, a spy role, you know, for the rebellion, like it helps add to that feeling of like isolation because we don't know any information that Darrow doesn't have either. So it's not like we can be like, oh, he's gonna be okay. He just doesn't know it yet. Like we don't know either.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely ramps up the tension because you really so much of it is about people's intentions and people's like plans and like the next step and like everybody's playing 4D chess
Yes.
in this series by the end. So, which is kind of like the whole thing. Darrow sort of has to learn how to play that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really complex. And I feel like being in someone else's head would take away from the tension and it would take away from like some level of complexity, because if we went into somebody else's head who'd been in society for the whole time, I feel like you'd have to dumb it down for the reader.
Yeah.
Because it would be too much. Darrow learns a lot of things slowly.
Mm-hmm.
So
and you get to learn with him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So it would be difficult to adapt to screen because it's just Darrow.
Yeah, and also part of it being a book, I think that spy books are probably better than spy movies in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a book, if you only have Darrow's perspective and it says, oh, the other character like narrowed his eyes at me, it's like, that's all you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if they're narrowing their eyes at you and then later Darrow realizes that maybe that look didn't mean what you thought it meant,
mm-hmm.
in a book medium, you can't know that. So it's sort of like, it's not quite a bait and switch because we are getting Darrow's full understanding at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then you understand later that you're like, oh, that's not what it really meant. Darrow just misunderstood. But because we're in Darrow's head, it doesn't matter because it's like, well, maybe I would have misunderstood too. But in a movie, it's like, now you have to have an actor who can do that without it being like
super suspicious.
Yeah, and a lot of people will just pick up on it, you know?
Yeah.
They'll just be like, oh, I didn't feel like he was that suspicious in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
Darrow's like overreacting, and then you're right later, and it's kind of like, oh.
Yeah.
I mean, spy movies are great, but that is one aspect of books, and I feel like that would be a really, really important aspect to this series if you wanted to adapt it. Because there's so much like
of just Darrow not understanding what's happening.
Yes. And you kind of like pick up, as a reader, you sort of pick up on things that he doesn't understand. But then at the same time, it's like, he is the only person that we're with. So it's kind of like, well, even though Darrow doesn't get it, and I think I might, I could still be wrong. It's such a different world. And
I will say, it's funny because Darrow talks the whole series about not trusting people. Mm-hmm. But there are several moments where he trusts people that he just should not.
Yes.
And you're like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, and there's so many times where like they try to set it up that it's like his only option is to trust this person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, is it though? Like sometimes I feel like it's not, and I don't know what else to do.
Especially in the second book with the Jackal.
Yes.
Like, when he makes that agreement with the Jackal to, like, use his communication systems and stuff, I was like, this is ridiculous. You should not do this.
Yeah.
And even and the thing was, I did remember what happened at the end of the second book, so, like, that definitely, colored my reading of it this time.
Oh, yeah. That's a thing, too, is, like, upon second reading, like, you're definitely... Because you have an idea of which characters are actually bad versus actually good, and which characters get a redemption arc and which ones don't. You're kind of like, you're seeing a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I feel like we talked about that being a bad idea anyway.
Yes. When we first read
it's like, yeah, because like...
There was nothing about the Jackal that implied that he was ever going to be redeemable.
Yeah.
And that remains true the entire series.
Yes, and it's just over. And I feel like that character in particular, Darrow is like, quote unquote, forced to trust him multiple times. And it's like, and it always backfires in some way.
Yep.
And it doesn't always backfire in the way that Darrow thinks it was going to, but like, it's just so, I found the second read to be more frustrating because I could see when Darrow was being like just outright stupid.
Yeah.
And I couldn't gloss over that as much.
He's also supposed to be, 18 or something at the start of the book?
I think he's 16.
16 in Red Rising, and then
Yeah.
like 20 something by the end of the series.
I think they said they were like 22,
Yeah.
23. Yeah, the series takes place over like a few years, but it's like a few years. It's not like a decade or more.
Yeah.
You know?
So
they're all very young.
I think it is frustrating, but I think he is realistically stupid in that way.
Yes. Oh, I agree with that. Completely agree with that. Yeah, there weren't any points where I was just frustrated that he was being stupid, but then at the same time, you realize like, oh yeah, it makes sense that he did this.
Because he's a teenager.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you remember, this is going to be a major spoiler, but did you remember like the scene in Morningstar with where Severo's shot?
Where Severo is shot?
Yeah.
Yes. Like at the very end?
Yeah, but did you remember that he survived?
Yes, I did.
Because I did remember, and that undercut the tension, but that was a scene where I was like the most impressed with his writing because I still was like extremely anxious that entire time.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Because I was like, because I remembered, I was like, I don't think Severo dies. But then I was like, when I reread it, I was like, maybe I'm remembering wrong. Like, maybe I gaslit myself because I don't want him to die.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, no, it's like, it's very easy to question that. It's a great twist because he spends so long, quote unquote, dead.
Mm-hmm.
And like his body's thrown around and like, it's very much like, yeah, this character's definitely dead. And then he's not.
Did you still feel anxious at that, or did you just trust, like, no, I know he lives?
I just trusted. I knew that he lived. I was like, I remember. It's like in the final battle. I didn't remember like the moment that he came back, like when during the battle. So I was kind of like waiting for it because I was like, I know that Severo, like, they're gonna bring him back and then he's gonna change the tide of the battle, but I couldn't remember at what point, and it just kept feeling like there were so many points that I was like, well, this would be a great time to bring him back. This would be a great time to bring him back, and then they don't until like the really very end.
Yes, the last minute.
Yeah, it really is.
And
it was good though. I remembered the line. I complained about this the first time we read it because the whole last few chapters is essentially like a bait and switch, where the plan is to get captured and get brought into the inner sanctum so that they can kill the sovereign.
Yeah.
Which is fine. It's a great plan. But we, as the reader, don't know that. And so as things go wrong or like things happen, you think they're really just going wrong and you're like, okay, how are they going to get out of this? Like,
yeah,
it's the third book. You really do trust that they're going to get out of it somehow. Like, I did not expect this to be a tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah. I never thought that Darrow was going to die. That was never a concern.
Yeah. Never. I mean, you just didn't. So, where was I going with this? What was I saying?
Well, it's the only moment in the series where Pierce Brown totally bait and switches you and doesn't give you information that Darrow does have.
Yes.
And it does feel a little bit cheap because it just kind of cuts away during the scene where they're planning this.
Yes.
And then you find out later. And I know why
he does
did
this
it
before.
Yeah.
He does it a couple of times in the series.
Yeah, because he does it during the battle with Roke too.
Yeah.
He does the same thing.
And I remember that we talked about it and I said that I didn't like it, but it also like depends on how it's done because in previous instances of this, it was not super long lasting. No. And I didn't feel cheated by the other times. I felt surprised. And I was like, oh, okay, so there's a plan all along. And it wasn't something that would have necessarily like come up until the moment the plan needed to change.
Yeah.
But there's one line, and I caught it again when I was listening to the end of Morningstar. And I remember that line because I specifically brought it up the first time we read the series. The last bait and switch takes so long to get through that it's like, I really don't think, I mean, they're not mind readers. No. I really don't think that realistically Darrow would go through the hours and like the intensity of this without even once thinking about like the switch, the plan.
Yes.
Like, especially with like Severo being dead, it's like that's his best friend. And he reacts to it as if his best friend is dead. But like we're inside his head, and it's like, well, you're reacting as if you think he's truly dead when you know that he's not.
Yeah.
So I understand the acting. But the one line is inside Darrow's head. He mentions that he wishes that Orion, which is one of his ship captains, could come and do something.
Mm-hmm.
Like that they were close enough to come do it. And it was just inside his head. He doesn't say it out loud. It's not for anybody else. It's just for Darrow and the reader. And that line bothered me this time just as much as it bothered me the first time. And this time I was like, you only put that line in there to continue the bait and switch.
Yep.
Because I was this time, because I knew about the bait and switch, I wasn't like harping on it. I wasn't like trying to nitpick. I was just like on the alert for lines that might give it away before the ending. And there really aren't any. And they don't have to be there.
No.
But like that line in particular, again, was just,
it's not like, something you'd actually think.
No, not at all. And I was
their
like, that line should have been cut.
Yeah. Their actual plan was to be captured. So no, he would not be thinking, oh, I wish we were being intercepted.
Yes. And it still bothers me. That line still bothers me. And the whole scene, you could definitely just cut it out. Like, it's one internal thought. He doesn't think about Orion one time else in the whole scene.
Nope.
So.
Yeah. It seems like an editing mistake almost.
Yeah. Because there isn't anything else to tip off the reader one way or the other. But that one definitely like puts you solidly in the idea that this plan is not going well.
Yeah. Other than, I mean, obviously, when Severo agrees to let Cassius go, that is a bit suspicious, because that's never been Severo's.
And that happens so close to the beginning of the plan that it's kind of like, I feel like you just sort of forget about it quickly. At least I do.
I did feel more empathetic with Cassius this time, I feel. I remember the first time we read it, I was like, I don't even really remember who he is, and I don't really care. But, like, if you read all three of them in succession like this, I feel like you do care more about his redemption.
Yes. I don't know that I loved Cassius's redemption in the first time I read through it, but I liked it the second time. And I think that it makes sense, especially, like, thinking about their ages and stuff. And it's like, I get it, and I get that there was a lot of mixed emotions, and Cassius was sort of nice sometimes in the middle, and sometimes he was not, and I was like, I can understand that, though. Like, he was a wild card for quite a time. Yeah. Because you just didn't know where
his family swore revenge on Darrow, so, like, he couldn't, like, drop that, and he was justifiably very upset about his brother's death, but
but then at the same time you're like, he's built such a relationship with Darrow, like they're really good friends, they have a lot in common, they were very, I'm gonna say compatible, but obviously I don't mean romantically.
And it was actually a very fitting ending that Cassius takes Lysander at the very end, because I could not remember what happened with him either.
I didn't even remember that he was in the control room.
No, I was like, oh, the kid is here?
Yeah, I was like, oh, geez. Okay. Well, that's traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Because, I mean, Cassius, I feel like he just follows an arc where he sort of, on his own, like, learns to be a little more accepting. And he comes to a lot of those conclusions on his own.
Yeah.
Which is nice. And you don't see, like, all the little things that change him, because I don't feel like Darrow's relationship alone changed him.
No. I think Darrow's honesty did change him, though, because, I mean, that was a lesson that Darrow had to learn, and does actually learn. That was one thing I liked. Because Roke's betrayal always bothered me, but I was like, it was important for Darrow to learn that when he is dishonest to that level, it does hurt the relationship, and, like, comes back to bite you. So when he told Cassius, like, hey, I'm going to show you this video of, like, what actually happened, to your family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it paid off.
Yeah, honesty and like is definitely a theme
Mm-hmm.
throughout the series, which I liked because like at the beginning, Darrow
You
has to
can't trust it.
lie a lot.
Yeah.
He can't trust anyone,
Nope.
and then by the end, it's like he has to. In the middle, he has to sort of learn who he can trust and who he can't.
Mm-hmm.
And there's such high stakes, and
Yeah.
like people die because of Darrow's decision to trust or not trust whoever. And you know, it's interesting how it plays out, like
Mm-hmm.
how he learns to trust because they're like stuff just doesn't just like go away. It's not like
Nope.
somebody dies and then he has one conversation with their friends and then everything is fine.
Yeah.
It's like it takes time and energy to fix relationships and to fix connections and to make people trust him again and stuff. And it's like I like that because I feel like sometimes maybe this is like a YA thing, but I feel like
Mm-hmm.
things end up resolved very quickly at times in some books
Yeah.
where they don't really explore what might be difficult because what one person is patently upset about might be something completely different than what the other person thinks that they did.
Yes.
And that those kinds of things like in real life don't just come out in a conversation where they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry that I hurt you and I hit your dog with a car." And it's
Yeah.
like and then the other person is like, "Well, that's not even like obviously I'm sad about my dog, but that's not really why I'm mad. I'm mad because you lied about it."
Yep.
And it's like, okay, well, that was two different perspectives. Like,
Yeah.
those are two different reasons. Like, the person who hit the dog is apologizing for hurting the dog, but not for lying or doing whatever
Mm-hmm.
else. And it's like, but the person doesn't even need an apology for hitting the dog. They need an apology for the emotional damage that was done to the
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like, because I remember hating Roke's betrayal the first time we read this.
Yes, you
And
despised that so much.
yes.
I think
I was
because
very,
I think you really, really relate to Roke
yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Hmm. He's the poet.
He is. He's great.
And
Yeah, go on.
yeah, so then, but this time when I read it, it made a lot more sense to me because I was like, yeah, he knows Darrow's been lying to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he realizes what Darrow's intentions are, and he realizes that Darrow was never honest about them. And like, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I didn't like about Roke really is the way that Roke and Darrow's relationship is played in some ways, and
Yeah.
we've talked about this before because they they don't have a lot of screen time together.
No.
Like Roke and Darrow are sort of like I think that what Pierce Brown wanted to do was portray them as just like fast friends
Yeah.
who just instantly clicked and you know they're just kind of BFFs like immediately.
Hmm.
And so which is okay, but I remember the first time like I was upset about Roke's betrayal, but I wasn't like overly upset because I just didn't really care about Roke. I did not remember that he existed. I think in the second book when he's like first brought back out, it's like one of those dramatic
Yeah.
moments where in like a TV show or something, the character like you turn around and then like there's a character there and it's just like dramatic music and you're just supposed to recognize them. And I think
Hmm.
they did that at some point in
Yep.
like Golden Sun to bring him back.
Yep.
And I didn't remember who he was
I
because
remember
he
that.
just
Yeah.
yeah, because he just doesn't get that much page time with Darrow, and I just don't feel like their relationship was actually developed like in front of us,
Hmm.
which I think is
No,
really the
because
only downfall in that betrayal was that like people who didn't intensely relate to Rogue like you did, I
hmm
feel like they're not gonna I don't feel like I ended up with that same sense of betrayal, even though it was played in the book as if I should.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing is that the second book has all of the characters from the first book plus new characters, and we talked about that at when we first read it. Of like,
Yeah.
it's confusing if you don't remember who all of these people are, and you haven't read the first book in a while, which was the case the first time we read it. You are gonna forget some of them and be like, "Who is this again?"
Yes. And also, like, some people have multiple names.
Yes.
And they're just used, like, interchangeably, which is fine, but there's always one name that's used more than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, I remembered all the characters. I really have trouble with Victra, Victoria, and Antonia. And I had trouble last time we read this series, and I had trouble this time reading
Oh,
this
you
series.
did?
I did.
This time,
and I could
Victra stood
definitely,
out more.
like, what?
This time, Victra stood out more to me, so it was easier.
Yeah, for sure. But I still got, like, Victra and Antonia mixed up. When they would say Victoria, sometimes it would take me a second. And I'm just like, I don't know why those names, they're very similar in that weird mental way, because they don't all sound the same necessarily, but they're all, like, similar enough that you're like, well, Victra could be Victoria in theory.
It's the problem with Pierce picking Roman culture and then, like, trying to follow through with names is that they all have a similar sound.
Yes.
Which
and
is
I don't
good
think
for weird world building, but
and I don't think it would have been nearly as difficult if he hadn't had Victoria. Like, if he had just called her Mustang the entire time after her nickname, and maybe just, like, very occasionally used Victoria, which it's not used a lot, but it's often enough, especially in the last book.
Yeah.
Because, like, the older adults in her life all call her Victoria.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean...
Yeah, but it's like, Victoria and Mustang are such different names, too.
Yeah, they're not...
and it's like, yeah. Which I get. I'm fine with it, but it's just like, I found those three to be very confusing. They're all female characters, and I feel like Victra and Antonia were already, like, fairly similar characters. Aren't they siblings?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
they're
so it's kind of like...
hate each other. Yep.
Yeah, so it was kind of like... I think just having all three in the mix at times was just kind of a lot. And it was a lot the first time, and it was a lot this time. So I struggled with that, just personally.
And speaking of Mustang, I remember the first time we read this, the end reveal that Darrow and Mustang did have a child together.
Yeah.
Bugged you. How'd you feel about it this time? The first time you said it bothered you.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
How did you feel about it this time?
I did not really care this time.
This time you were like, oh, that makes sense.
No, because I just remembered.
Oh, you
and
did?
I was like, yeah, I remembered that was the ending. And I was like, all right. I mean, I was just kind of waiting for the reveal, and then I was like, it's whatever. I didn't care either way this time.
I feel like it was a good end to the series, and I feel like it did make sense. This time I noticed more when Mustang met his family, because that was, like, part of her reason for not telling Darrow.
Yeah.
And so this time I feel like in the third book I was paying attention when she meets his mom, and I was like, oh, that's, like, when his mom tells that story about Darrow being really kind. Yeah. It's like, oh, this is why she didn't tell him.
Yeah.
Because he's too nice to be...
He is. Well, and I liked the point that he wouldn't have given his all.
Yeah.
If he knew. And I was like, yeah, because at Darrow's heart, like, he really just wanted a family. Mm-hmm. He just wanted a family. He just wanted to settle down and live his life. That's what he lost at the beginning of the series. I mean, he lost everything at the beginning of the series.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he sort of gets to reclaim it, which is cool. And I like that. But they were absolutely right that as a character, if Darrow had known that he had a kid, he would not have taken the risks, because the risks he took were just his own. And he knew that he couldn't, like, just die. He wasn't going on, like, full-on suicide missions per se.
No, but he knew, facing the Jackal especially at the end there, he knew he might die. Yeah. And he just trusted that, like, Mustang and Severo would be able to still accomplish their goal, basically.
Yeah. But
which they would have, even if he died, but...
Yeah. But he wouldn't have done that if he thought that he had a chance at a normal life. Again.
And I think that was the cool thing, too, about him and Lorne's relationship, his sword master, was that they do seem really similar in that way. of they really just wanted families, but then they had no choice, kind of because of the society that they were in. They needed to be warriors, so.
Yeah, that's a good juxtaposition.
I was very sad about Lauren's death again.
Yeah, that wasn't super fun.
Although, I was also more angry this time because, again, I do feel like you remember people better on the second read. The first time we read through, I had definitely forgotten who Tactus was by the second book.
Oh, yeah.
And so his death at Lauren's hands didn't really bother me that much, but this time it kind of did bother me.
Yeah. His death definitely was, like, much sadder. And I know that Tactus was a character that went back and forth. And there's a lot of characters that do that, that are sort of redeemed, unredeemed, redeemed, unredeemed sort of characters. And, like, Tactus was one that was, like, he seemed unredeemable.
He did.
And then he gets, like, essentially a deathbed redemption. Which is fine, but it's still, like, I felt like I was still sort of mixed on it.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of like, yeah, but he's already gone back and forth a couple of times.
Yeah.
So, like, it's nice that he had the redemption at the last minute, but then at the same time, it's hard to believe it. Because he doesn't ever actually get to prove himself, really.
No, because he dies. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that sometimes Darrow latched on to people who were sort of weird to latch onto. Like Tactus. Like, he talks about Tactus a lot.
Yeah.
Throughout the rest of the books. And I'm like, I don't know why Tactus was the one. He wasn't even nice.
He wasn't even nice. No, that's true.
Even when he was being a good character, he wasn't nice. Ever. So I kind of like, I don't know. Darrow puts some people on a pedestal that I'm like, do they really deserve to be on a pedestal in your mind, Darrow? Is this like something? I don't know.
I agree. No, I wouldn't have put Tactus on a pedestal, and I don't even know that Darrow would have been that close to him. It was just like after the betrayal with Roke, he was like, I don't want this to happen again. So
yeah, he's kind of desperate.
Yeah. But I would also say that is one thing that makes Lauren similar but different from Darrow, is that Lauren didn't hesitate to kill Tactus. And that's probably a good choice, because he's a gold through and through.
Yeah.
And they don't really give second chances.
Yeah, that's true.
Also, I did not remember Darrow being so devious with the Moon Lord in the third book.
Did you not? I remember that.
No, when
it was happening, I was like, oh yeah, I remember him doing this. That's wild.
Yeah, and it made so much sense, and it was like a great tactical move.
Oh, yeah.
But I was like, wow, he really just, like, sabotaged all of his ability to, like, capture ships and stuff, and blew up his dockyards.
Yep. And it's because he didn't trust him.
Rightfully so. I mean...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. It was a good decision, but it was just, like, the amount of collateral damage that Darrow is okay with at the end
is way different from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. At the beginning, he's like, we can't sacrifice, like, we're not sacrificing anyone, like, you can't just kill... Like, you can't just, kill hundreds of people in, like, a bombing to, like, make a point or to, like, take out one political enemy. And then by the end, it's like, I do like that he keeps it calculated. He's still not into collateral damage. He still, like, considers it very bad, but he's willing to use it.
Yeah.
Which I think is important, and I don't think that he could have really fought the Golds like in all-out war without doing that.
No.
At least to some extent. And I think that he did it as minimally as he possibly could.
Yes. I think he really it was great to see Severo kind of trying and failing at being Ares.
Yeah.
Because you realize, like, that's what happens if you swing too much in that direction of, like, I don't care about the collateral damage. But then Darrow does also accept the lesson of some collateral damage is necessary.
Yeah.
And you have to just really pick what's worth it.
Yeah. In some ways, like, he really just learns, like, that it's war.
Yeah.
Because in war, it's like nobody really wants collateral damage, but essentially 99% of the damage and the lives taken in wars are collateral damage.
Yeah.
Like, there's really only the very, very top level people who decided to go to war, and then they just throw everybody else. And it's like those people typically survive the war because they never actually go on the front lines.
Yep. And especially in a war like this, because I mean, the whole series is basically about a civil war.
Yes. Just on a massive, massive scale.
Yeah, because there's no more countries anymore. Like, they're a unified human race, except for the colors, obviously.
Yeah. There's a hierarchy. It's like a caste system.
Yeah, it's like a caste system. But everyone is like one nation and whatever, so they're all following the same rules, hypothetically. Yeah, so all of the damage is painful to both sides, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, war is just messy.
It is. And I think this series does a great job in showing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it does a pretty good balance because, like, Darrow is technically a higher up kind of person that they don't want to lose, but he really doesn't hesitate to go in to like the thick of things. Like, he's very much leading from the front.
Yep.
Which, I mean, I feel like a good number of characters do that. I feel like golds don't necessarily. There are golds, obviously, like, that stay behind and back. Like all battles, any kind of conflict, they're like, no, we're gonna go sit in the chambers and with a bunch of security, and we're not gonna worry about it. We'll just make decisions from here. But there are a good number that like go into the fray too, even though they're higher ups.
Yeah.
Because they very much have like a conquesting sort of mentality.
Yeah. And I also like the way that this book balances like individual versus collectives. Like the scene where the soldiers on board the ship find out that Neril has been killed by the jackal.
Mm-hmm.
Stage that like insurrection, and then like there's a part of you that's like disappointed because you're like, oh, you're just gonna go kill all the golds now, like that's not a solution. But then there's like a party that's like, the golds have been killing and oppressing them for how long? Like, yeah, it's just a good way of showing like how messy it is and how a good leader has to not just like, I don't know,
you can't like, just make sweeping decisions for large groups of people without considering the individuals involved in them. Because it's like, yeah, you can say, like, oh, we need all the Reds to rise up. But it's like, on an individual level, a lot of people aren't willing to do that. There are going to be people who have either bought into it and, like, they're just comfortable and they just want to keep living their lives. I mean, you see it now.
Yeah.
I mean, even, like, everybody always uses, like, World War II as examples for things. And it's like, but it's true. Like, there were Germans that just wanted to continue living their lives as normal. And a lot of them did, for the most part, through the entire war. They just didn't want to, like, be involved in anything. Mm-hmm. Even though if they knew, like, the ins and outs, they would probably be horrified.
Yeah.
By, like, what was happening, like, right outside their front door, essentially. But it's like, there's a lot of people like that in every war and in every group of people, you know, who are not gonna participate. And then there's some that participate too quickly. Mm-hmm. And they jump on the bandwagon or they start mobs and stuff like that. And yeah, there's a good mix. Because sometimes people in this series are way more reasonable than you think they were going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're completely unreasonable. And you never quite know what you're going to get when you start it off with. Like, you start the conversation with them.
Is kind of true of real life. Like, some people are just better at putting on a good face than others. Some people are exactly how they appear to be, and some people are very much not. So
yeah, it's good times. It's a lot of politics, like you mentioned by the end. Oh, but I do think with political setup, I think that it's set up pretty well in the first couple of books to have the final. And while some of the names were confusing, some of the names are throughout the entire series, and it's a little easier to keep track of them. But I think that the first book does a really good job in setting up politics, because you're in a Hunger Games type of scenario. Put it kind of at that, because that's, I think, the easiest way to understand it. You're not supposed to, like, kill everybody. You're not even supposed to really kill anyone in it, but it's like a survivalist thing. It's their institution. It's how they train their top, like, generals and stuff like that. But you are introduced to a ton of people in that institute, and you really, like, start to get a feel for how the politics are going to work. And while the stakes are high, you also know that, like, because you know that people can die in the institute. And a lot of people do.
Yeah, a lot of people, like an unusual amount actually for their year.
Yeah. So you understand that there are stakes involved with the Institute, but at the same time, you're also like, the point is that they're kind of learning, and they are all aware that all of the people in the Institute are people that they are going to be up against politically later on.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them really thought that they would be involved in like a whole civil war.
No.
But they do know that every single person in the Institute is their rival. And you start to kind of like, it's like all the politics on a really small scale, which I think was a really smart way to put that in there, because by the mid-second book, it's like politics on a much, much grander scale. You've got new people involved. You've got rulers who have been in charge for, 80 years. And you have planets, and you have planetary alliances, and you have people who are loyal to so-and-so, but not to this other person, but they have to pretend to be loyal to the other person. And it's just like, it's very like interconnected and stuff. And I think that the Institute really helps set it up in a way that helps you understand. It gives you a crash course for later.
It does. And also it helps establish not the course of the books, because it's not exactly what happens like overarching through the series, but it does kind of show you like what Darrow is probably going to do in a way, and it helps make it feel really earned. Like each book, I feel like he learns slightly different lessons and he keeps applying those, and it's really nice to see his character do that, and then also feel like he still struggles. Like there's nothing in this series that feels like, oh, Darrow was just handed this,
Yeah. And I do feel like the development is pretty on point for most of the characters. Because while Darrow is still learning the lessons, he still makes mistakes. And sometimes he'll make the same type of mistake again. And it's like, because, maybe he didn't make the same mistake here, but then later on he got complacent and he made the same mistake that he'd made, in book 1. And I just think that the development there is really good. And most characters are developed in a very similar way, in that you see them make mistakes and then you watch them be set up for the same mistake later, and they don't
see if they fall for it again.
And some of them do. Like some of them don't learn, but a lot of them do. Like a lot of the main characters, they follow really good arcs.
Yeah, I liked Victor a lot more by the end than I remember the first time we read too. Partly because I remembered who she was better this time.
Yeah.
But
I definitely remember liking her better as well on the second read.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, she actually like has a lot going on here, and like Darrow, that's a case where Darrow puts trust in a right person.
Yes.
And he finally does it right. Like, he had these chances with Rogue and Tactus, and they both kind of went sideways for different reasons, but with Victor, he really got it right.
Yes.
And also, he pretty much ends all of these books with, like, a good, not too much of a cliffhanger, where it feels, like, forced, but, like, you're excited. Well, the second book kind of ends in a cliffhanger.
Yeah, I was going to say, the second book is, like, a straight-up cliffhanger.
Yes.
Like, that's, like, it's like the middle of a scene.
Yeah. But, but each of them, he kind of almost starts every book with Darrow getting kicked down.
Yeah.
Which I'm okay with.
Yeah.
Like, it's a good way of, like, again, making it feel earned, of, like, you don't start the book and Darrow's in this great place.
Yeah. I still like the series. I don't think that I liked it as much the second time around, though. I don't know why.
I haven't reread, we were talking about this before we started recording, I haven't reread many books, and I feel like it's a way that I really decide if something is like a 5-star book, is if it's worth rereading. I would say this was worth rereading. Like, I don't regret.
Oh, yeah. I think I got a lot more out of it upon a second read, which I think goes for most books. Not all of them. Like, there has to be something there to, like, get out of it.
Yeah, not every book stands up to rereading. I feel like these did stand up. I agree, though, when you read them slower, you do notice a little bit more of, like, those moments where you're being a little manipulated by the perspective. Yeah.
I found myself got frustrated And Daryl would be stupid sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. He would.
Which is not fun. I think that is the worst emotion to have while reading a book is frustration. Because almost anything else, I don't know, almost anything else, I like, if I'm angry at like something that happened, or like if I'm sad or whatever, it's like, okay, these are fine emotions. But like when I get frustrated, I am tempted to put the book down. Frustration for me is not, it's not a really bad emotion while reading a book.
I agree with that, but I will say that if I actually don't like a book, I think bored is the worst feeling to have while reading a book.
I can see that.
Because you're reading it for entertainment, and if you're feeling absolutely nothing.
Yeah, okay, I would put bored at the top, and then frustrated underneath that, as far as like worst emotions to feel.
There is a lot of like moments of kind of helpless anger in this series.
Yes, and I did remember that going into it, and I still like got angry at some of the same points again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm still mad.
Yeah. Like, Fitchner's death was horrible.
Yeah, I think it's because there's very high violence, and I think that the amount of senseless violence is crazy. And I was actually thinking about this the other day, because I was like, well, you know, there's so much violence that like we're desensitized to, like just in real life and stuff. But I think that, at least for me, in real life, I can look at violence and say like, this is horrible. Like, I can listen to true crime and stuff and be rightfully destroyed by it. But at the same time, I can be like, although it feels senseless, it makes sense because people are depraved and the world is imperfect and fallen and man is sinful. So I can kind of rationalize it, where I'm like, even though it's real life, just significantly worse fiction. But in fiction, I was thinking it over, and I was like, it gets me worse in fiction, and I think it's because the author doesn't have to put it there.
Yeah.
Like, it's 100% a choice to have senseless violence in a fiction book, and I know that, like, you have to have conflict and all of that, so I'm not really, like, dissing on the concept of senseless violence in fiction. Yeah. It's just, it's incredibly more frustrating and more angering to me to see it in a fiction book than almost in real life.
Yeah. No, I agree, because it is, you know deep down, like, this was a choice, and there is a sense of, like, wanting things to be fair in fiction.
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily, they can't be fair every time, right?
Right. And it's like, it's fine. Obviously, like, we both write fiction.
Yeah.
And, like, I'll write things that are, like, unfair to the characters and stuff, because that's how you write a story. You build conflict, and like in real life, there's unfair things. I just find it more triggering in fiction because I cannot rationalize it.
Yeah, I feel like the Book of Brave New World is like that for me. Of like, I understand like the choices the author made, but it still makes me like so angry.
Yeah.
I'm just like, why did you have to do this?
Yes. Yeah.
And there is not a lot of why is the whole thing. Like, there's no reason for some of it. It's just people making a choice.
Yeah.
Like the jackal kills so many people because he's unwilling to lose.
Yeah. And he's unwilling to even like be in like spitting distance of appearing weak.
And
like, it doesn't matter that he probably wouldn't be perceived as weak anyway. But he won't even come near it.
No.
And he does some really, really awful things.
Yeah.
And again, that are just senseless, and there's no real reason. Like,
yeah,
stuff is taken like so far. Like, some of the violence is
I mean, they literally set off nukes in the third book.
Yeah. For literally like basically no reason.
Yeah. Just because the jackal wants to prove he can.
It's like, and the jackal really, like, he just wanted to be in charge of everything. Which is crazy because he was a really ambitious character. He was brutal, and he was already in charge of almost everything.
Well, in charge of monsters. Yeah.
What?
In charge of Mars.
Yeah.
Well, I
But
guess
that wasn't enough.
With the blackmail, he was pretty in charge at the end of the series, yeah.
Yeah, but he could have taken over a lot more without having to focus on being sovereign. You know,
Yeah.
he could have accomplished a lot if he had used his brains and his ambition in like a slightly different direction.
Yeah.
And he's like a little less brutal. Like Golds have to be brutal in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very, very clever and really smart, and he could have taken over. I think that the Jackal, if he had not hyper fixated on becoming sovereign, he probably could have taken over.
Yeah.
Like basically everything. He could have just been in charge of everything and made the sovereign a figurehead.
Mm-hmm.
If any character in this book series could have accomplished that, it would have been him. But he fixated on wanting to be the sovereign. He wanted to go straight for that crown instead of, going a slightly slower route. But if he'd gone the slower route, he wouldn't have necessarily caught Darrow's attention.
No.
And he could have just been, what do they call it? Been a worm in the machine?
Shadow figure? Oh, ghost in the machine?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know for sure if that's what I'm thinking.
That is the term.
Okay, he could have just been a ghost in the machine until like it was too late for anybody to really stop him.
Yeah.
But no,
I agree.
He chose violence. He chose senseless violence instead.
And I feel like I do really like that, like, him and Mustang are siblings, and like she's going to become leader now.
Yeah.
Like, she got everything that he wanted just by being a more reasonable and smarter person.
By going through the political... Mustang used the system.
Yeah.
And Jackal wanted to exist outside of the system. He only used the system when he could bully people in it.
Yeah.
When he could force his way into getting what he wanted. He only ever used like blackmail and power to get what he wanted within the system. And you can't do that. Like you have to balance those.
Yep.
Which is kind of what Mustang did. She never really used violence, but she used the system really well.
Yeah. She used violence when she had to, but
yeah.
Most of the time she didn't have to because Darrow was committing all the violence.
Yeah, that's the thing too. You gotta make friends. You gotta have friends, and the Jackal had no friends.
I feel like the Battle for Mars was a really great scene in these books that I had kind of forgotten about, because it showed like how smart the Jackal was. Like that's like the first time you really underestimate him outside of the Institute.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say Academy.
Yeah. Remind me again. Give me a rundown of the battle, because I feel like I was reading that at a point where I was listening to like 5 minutes at a time.
That's when they get into the shells and they do the Iron Rain.
Uh-huh.
And they land inside those like mech suits, and then Darrow and those guys almost all drown.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because they set off an EMP, and you're like, oh, he saw you coming.
Yeah, okay, I remember that now.
Yeah. And like I feel like it was really well written in that you feel like very trapped and like, how is he ever going to get out of this type thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up because that's one of my like rereading. I was like, oh, this is really good, and I forgot that this happened somehow.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely like different villains throughout the series, and I feel like the Jackal sticks around. Mm-hmm. Well, obviously he sticks around essentially beginning to end.
Yeah. But
like he kind of comes in and out, and it's really interesting thinking about it now, because it's like it makes a lot of sense because it's so ingrained in political upheaval and stuff. It makes sense that you would have to focus on different people at different times.
Yeah.
Like there's no way that they could have gotten rid of every single one of their enemies. But like, and the Jackal takes advantage of that, because there's quiet times when they're focusing on the Sovereign, or they're focusing on the Moon Lord, or they're focusing on somebody else, focusing on gaining support.
Augustus, who was the first big villain.
Yes. And the Jackal is moving And you kind of know, like, they bring him up every once in a while in those moments where you're like, you kind of know that, like, he's got to be doing something because he doesn't stop.
Nope.
But you can't focus on him right now. And so he's sort of like a shadow that kind of follows closely in the second two books. I don't feel like he's the villain theoretically at the Institute, but he's so far away for most of it that it's sort of difficult to feel. And they're kids, essentially, in the Institute, so it doesn't feel like he's that real. But like the farther
the scene where he loses his hand is also very good and creepy.
Yes, and Darrow realizes right then that he should have killed him.
Yep.
And then it's something that he doesn't do, and repeatedly he says to himself, I should have killed him. And I was like, stop being Batman. Just like, this is the one character that you have thought this multiple times about.
Yep.
It's the
because
only
he's right.
person. Yeah, because he's right. He should have trusted
the only way to stop him is to kill him.
Yeah. Which is true. You have anything else specific that you want to go over? Because I can't think of anything super. I mean, we could talk about this series for a long time. I don't even feel like we didn't even like really go through the plot and stuff. We just like definitely spoilers, but at the same time, you know, we just sort of a lot of themes, which I think is just what happens on your second read of a book anyway, because those are the things that you have time to notice when you're not just trying to focus on the characters and what's actually happening.
Yeah, I will say it's interesting. He doesn't really go much into religion at all in these books.
Yeah, he definitely avoids that a lot.
Yeah, like the Obsidians have the false religion of the Golds being gods. Which is given to them.
Yeah, which the Reds had, sort of.
Yeah.
They weren't gods, but they were as close as you could get.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Reds believed in an afterlife.
Yes.
But that was about it. They didn't really, like, pray for anything.
Yeah, they didn't have, like, there's no, like, higher power or anything.
No. And
the Bible's mentioned a couple times. There's biblical allusions, but very few.
Yeah, but it's interesting because, like, you never meet anyone with, like, a personal belief.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious if, like, he'll ever go into that or not. Maybe not. Like, I guess he's kind of using the assumption that, like, religion died in the old society before the new society, but...
Yeah. Which is a terrible assumption that I feel like a lot of sci-fi makes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's stupid, in my opinion, to believe that religion will just disappear over time. Like, the more technology we get, the less religion we need, when in reality, like, the more technology that we get now, the more religious people get. It's just that people tend to think that humanism is not strictly a religion, which, I mean, it's a philosophical standpoint, though, which is, in my opinion, just a religion. Like, any time that you get into philosophy, you're just getting into religion.
Do you think, like, the fear of robots and stuff in this society is almost religious?
Yes.
Because I could see that argument.
Oh, yeah. Well, and like in real life, as we get more and more AI and more stuff like that, people are talking about, like, what it would mean to be, like, I don't know enough about it, but it's transhumanism. And people talk about, like, well, how much of your human body can you replace with machines before you're not a human anymore? Ooh. And those are religious and philosophical questions. They're not scientific.
Yeah.
And so the more tech that we get, religion does not disappear. Like, and philosophy doesn't disappear. And I feel like maybe it's a little off topic, but it's just like, it's the idea that in a lot of sci-fi, religion vanishes because, like, oh, we don't need it anymore because we have technology. And it's like, no, actually, the more technology we get, the more philosophical questions we have, and the more important religion is. Because what answers those philosophical questions? Whatever your religion is, whether that's Christianity or Hinduism or atheism or agnosticism, those are your religions.
Yeah,
and
because
they're gonna inform you.
Basically, it seems like the Golds are set up as atheists.
Yes.
But you don't really, and part of it is, okay, like, there's not a lot of time for Darrow to, like, sit and have these kind of talks. I mean, they have philosophical discussions, but it's just interesting that, like, it never comes up that there's any, like, religious connotation to any of the other groups that, like, become different rebellious groups and, like, all of that. It's all, yeah, it's like everyone is a humanist in the book.
Yeah, that there is no other thought, which is silly. And I mean, people have been coming up with religions for thousands of years, and I think that it's such an integral part of humanity that I understand that, like, sci-fi tends to be extremely complex in technology and sometimes in philosophical questions. And so I think that a lot of authors just don't feel like they have the time and energy and resources to also tackle religions and what they might look like. So I get that, but I do think that it's kind of a tragedy that it's sort of standard that sci-fi tends to go that direction.
And I'll be curious to see if we read the other ones, because he hasn't been on Earth in the whole series, which is something that I liked on first read, and I still liked this time, of that, you know, a lot of sci-fi series are set on Earth because, you know, we're on Earth. But I kind of liked this series doesn't do that, and you only go to Earth at the very end. And so I'm curious if that will come up more. Yeah, they're just visiting. But I'm like, because it's kind of the birthplace of, like, the culture and humanity as a whole, like, I wonder if it'll come up more or not. And maybe it won't come up more. I don't know. It was just a thought that I had.
I mean, the next books are massive.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember. I haven't looked at how big the last one is, but it's huge. Yeah. I mean, both of us ended up with the hardcovers, which do tend to be a little more daunting, but we'll see. The plan. Do we have anything else to say about the 3 books? That was a really good point about the religions, because it was something that I noticed. I did think about it while I was reading.
And I feel like one of the criticisms is maybe that he went a little too black and white with, like, naming things by color. But at the same time, I think it worked well in this series to have that kind of caste system. I think color was just an easy way to do it, because we are familiar with, like, the concept of racism.
Yeah, so, I have no problem with racism being the thing in books, because it's like, it's just so universal.
Yeah, like, he combines he combines the classist and the racist elements together, basically.
Yeah.
Because it's a caste system the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and he explains it multiple times in the first book and the second one, but then it's sort of just like, you deal with the same colors all the time. Like, I don't actually fully understand what browns do, and yellows are just, they're the doctors. Yeah, and I don't understand, like, where they actually fit, because it's like, well, in real life, there's some doctors, like, if you're a surgeon yellow, like, are you a higher status than, like, another yellow? But then, like, all the reds are kind of the same level.
No, because he talks about higher reds and low reds too.
Yeah, and so I feel like it's fine. It makes it very understandable, and, like we said, for the most part, you kind of just get it. Like, violets are weird because there seems to be not that many of them. And we don't encounter a lot of them.
No.
It's just like, there's
other
colors. There's greens. Greens, I don't know. I don't even remember anything about greens.
Aren't they the technology people? I thought that's what they were.
What are blues?
Blues are pilots, like space people.
Wouldn't that just be technology, and it just be different?
I think you can focus solely on space travel and then on, like, ordinary technology.
I suppose they're both tech, though. There's oranges. I don't remember what
the
they are.
The fact that we do not know is a sign
the
that
vast
some of
majority
it was a little underexplained, which is fine because you don't need to know it for the books. But I could definitely see it as a criticism of, like, how did you pick some of these? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah. No, I didn't have any other points.
Okay. So the plan is that we're going to read the next 3 books over, I don't know how long, because they're massive, and I think
hopefully this year.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it'll happen this year, but I feel feel like it should. It's February. Yeah. I feel like we should be okay. We've sort of like lost the plot on like the month by month, and I don't think we're gonna really restart that until maybe next year.
Probably not.
Depending on how these go.
Yeah.
Because we would take the end of the year off anyway.
Yeah.
But the plan is that we'll read the next 3 books and we'll do a podcast on each one as we go. Yeah. And then I guess we'll see how that pans out, whether or not we want to do like an overall one at the end. I don't know. Like, to talk about the Red Rising and then also the next 3.
Yeah. We could maybe do like a shorter one talking about if we recommend all of them or, you know.
Yeah.
That kind of angle.
I feel like that would probably be a good idea just because it's such a big series. And then I suppose we're going to have to decide what we're going to do next. I have so many unread books.
Yeah, I think we actually each have a couple that we've given to each other that we have on the list. But
yeah, I think we do. I know I have at least one from you right now.
Yeah.
Maybe 2.
Yeah. So we'll keep going with Pierce Brown for a little while and see where it goes.
Yeah, it'll be good. All right. This was a little long, but thanks for listening, guys. We really appreciate you. Sorry that we took a year off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think we have 3 subscribers at this point, so
maybe it'll be a happy surprise.
Maybe. I also haven't gotten on the YouTube channel in like over a year, so maybe we've gained 1 billion subscribers. Who knows? Maybe we have 100,000 subsubscribers and we just didn't notice.
We don't even know we have an audience.
I'm not holding my breath on that. Not even a little bit.
We're not even on Book Talk.
No. So, it's all good. Well, we really appreciate anyone who does listen to this podcast. We have a lot of fun doing it. And I'm looking forward to being able to do it hopefully consistently this year to at least some extent and hopefully just continue it. I don't want to put any expectations on it just because I feel like life gets in the way so much. But I think that saying that we'll get the next 3 books done is probably realistic.
Yeah.
And we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah, I feel like we got back on track recently, so we can just have to stay on it.
Yes, we do. There's a lot of things that I need to get back on track with. It's crazy how much planning your wedding and stuff gets in the way of life.
You have a fresh new year now, 2024.
Yeah. It'll be good. All right. Thanks, guys. Like this video, I guess, and subscribe if you'd like to be notified when we are doing more of these podcasts. And have an awesome day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Right. Bye.